ketogenic diet, it consists of 70 to 80% fat, which is approximately 165 grams of fat in a 2,000 calorie diet. And then it's 10 to 20% protein, which is approximately 75 grams of protein on a 2,000 calorie diet. Then the arrow, that area where the arrow is pointing, is just foods that are high in protein and also high in fat. And then the carbohydrate breakdown is 5 to 10% carbohydrate, which is approximately 50 grams of carbohydrate or less.
So what is a carbohydrate? A carbohydrate, most people think of potatoes, rice, pasta, the simple things that we think of, but carbohydrates are actually a lot more. We need 6 essential nutrients to live. It's going to be carbohydrates, fat, protein, alcohol, vitamins and minerals are 1, and then water. Out of those, carbohydrates is 1, and then out of those 6, only 4 of those will actually provide energy for you. It's going to be carbohydrates, fat, protein, and alcohol. And it's important to note that with carbohydrates, they are one of the only ones that can provide energy for our brain. So 75% of our energy can come from the ketones that are produced from other energy sources like our muscle, and then 30% of it has to come from carbohydrates. So we have to consume carbohydrates for our brain to be able to function. Carbohydrates are also broken down into 2 different categories, the simple and the complex. The simple are going to be things like soda, milk, fruit, things like that are going to be easy for our body to be broken down. Once it breaks it down fast, it will enter our bloodstream pretty fast, increasing our blood sugar faster. And then complex carbohydrates are going to be things that have fiber in them and that are going to be harder to break down, or we might not be able to break them out at all, like fiber. Those are actually going to decrease how fast the glucose enters into our bloodstream. Carbohydrates are going to be anything with sugar, starch, and fiber. Things that are going to have that are going to be fruits and veggies. And then we have a whole list. Skipped one. We have a whole list of things that are going to have carbohydrates in them: rice, potatoes, donuts, ramen, tortillas, beans are all good ones. And then for our college students, energy drinks, and then anything that's sweet in your coffee, so the whipped cream, the sugar, the milk, all of that is going to be a carbohydrate.
So what does 50 grams of carbohydrate look like in a day? And since most of the diets are 50 grams or less, we wanted to show you in these images here, but these images are kind of misleading because each plate is showing you what 50 grams of carbohydrate looks like in a day. And you would be consuming that all at one time. So we included some lists of common fruits and vegetables that you might be consuming, and they're USDA nutrition facts on how much carbohydrate there are per serving. And so, for example, a person who's eating banana, that's 30 grams of carbohydrate, that would be approximately 60% of your carbohydrate intake for the entire day. So you would not have much left over. And if you had to have a cup of oatmeal at 39 grams, that would be more than 80% of your carbohydrate intake for the day. So in a few minutes, we're going to discuss how this plays in with the restrictions and the recommended diet. But first, we want to talk about 20 grams or less. So 20 grams or less, there's certain ketogenic diets that restrict even further down to 20 grams or less. And you can see we included here the different amounts of, like, there's some higher carbohydrate, lower carbohydrate fruits and vegetables. So you can tweak what you're eating to accommodate that 20 grams, but it's still very restrictive. That half a cup of blueberries would be, again, 55% of your carb intake for an entire day. So we're going to pass it to Lydia, who's going to talk about how these restrictions compare to the U.S. dietary guidelines.
So the carbohydrate recommendation for adults on the standard 2,000 calorie diet by the 2020-2025 U.S. dietary guidelines for Americans is 225 to 325 grams per day. The GGA bases the dietary guidelines on current scientific evidence to meet and maintain good health and meet nutrient needs and prevent disease in all populations. As you can see, there's a huge difference from the ketogenic diet carbohydrate intake of 50 grams or less in comparison to the GGA guidelines. For fruit, in a ketogenic diet, most fruits are restricted and very few fruits can be consumed, such as raspberries and blackberries in very small amounts. Some vegetables are restricted, but not all. Some of these that are restricted are potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, corn, peas, and legumes. All grains are restricted, such as rice, wheat, corn, and oats. And then, of course, protein and fat are increased in the ketogenic diet. So here's an example of a healthy 2,000 calorie eating pattern recommended by the DGA. It includes a variety of healthy breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. Individuals on a ketogenic diet would not be able to consume the oatmeal with bananas that you see on the screen. Would not be able to consume the beans or the brown rice from the lunch menu or the lunch plate. Would not be able to consume the oranges or the pasta on the dinner plate, or the popcorn, or the peaches. So as you can see, it's very restrictive. Popcorn is actually considered a healthy snack. It's a whole grain. For 2 cups of popcorn, it's 21 grams of carbohydrate, which would take up approximately 42% of the carbohydrate intake if somebody was on a keto diet. So as you can see, that would be off limits because of that, because that would leave little room to eat anything else. So yeah, omitting all these foods and restricting all these foods can affect the fiber that you're intaking, your vitamins, and your minerals.
The physiological. Now we're going to move on to the physiological effects that the keto diet will have on our body while we're on it. The first one being our fiber intake. The average American will consume between 35 to 20, should be consuming 35 to 25 grams of fiber a day, but the actual American only consumes about 15 grams of fiber a day, and that's on the high end actually. And then an individual on a low carbohydrate diet might consume 10, but it's more likely that they'll consume less than that of grams of fiber. That is less than half of the recommended amount for most individuals. And the possible effects of this are going to be constipation, and it's going to affect also our vitamin deficiencies. It can affect in vitamin deficiencies. Another thing is that it's going to affect the way we absorb foods. Other vitamins that we might be deficient in are going to be selenium, thiamine, vitamin D, A, E, B6, and potassium. Most of the research studies that we read actually put their participants in multivitamins to help decrease the risk of them getting any of these vitamin deficiencies. However, that is not possible with phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are natural chemicals found in our food, which most of them have health benefits towards us. These cannot be in multivitamins or cannot be in other forms of supplements, as we cannot replicate them right now, as we don't fully understand them, but we do know that there's health benefits when consuming these. And these are going to be things like we've mentioned before, the berries that are really highly restrictive, and greens. Other things that are going to happen with our body while we're on the diet are going to be, you're going to get symptoms. Some of these symptoms by the media are called the keto flu. The reason it's called the keto flu is because it feels like you are having the flu, but it's not. It's just because you're missing those carbohydrates. You're going to feel things like nausea, fatigue, brain fog, diarrhea, and then you're also at a higher risk to develop kidney stones, just because of the ketosis you're in while you're on the diet. And now Lydia will talk more about the other side effects.
Okay, so weight loss and body composition. Body composition is the amount of fat and non-fat mass that your body is made up of, such as muscle and other tissues like bones and organs. But today we will just focus on fat mass and muscle mass. Multiple studies have supported the efficacy of the use of the ketogenic diet for weight loss in overweight and obese individuals in both adult males and females. In 12 studies of at least 4 weeks, participants lost weight ranging from 22 to 34 pounds and subsequently reduced their BMIs. These participants also had a reduced waist circumference. Fat mass was also reduced, including visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat that you have in your central body part around your organs. These participants also had mild decreases in fat-free muscle mass and no changes in muscle strength. In a different 6-week study comparing weight loss from a low-fat, low-calorie diet and a low-calorie ketogenic diet, found that both diets were just as effective for weight loss, and individuals from both groups had similar weight losses. So although the ketogenic diet does help reduce weight and increase fat loss among overweight and obese individuals, it is not always the best option for everyone, and a low-fat, low-calorie diet can be just as effective, less restrictive, and more nutritious.
So now we're going to talk about, we know that the ketogenic diet, the carbohydrate restriction, forces our body to break down those ketones and use them as fuel source. So, but we want to make that a very important note one more time again, that when in ketosis, ketones can only supply 70% of the brain energy. So 30% needs to come from glucose. And if there's no glucose available from the carbohydrate source or stored carbohydrate in the form of glycogen, the body will break down muscle to make those the glucose. So when we talk about sport performance, the main theory for using a ketogenic diet in sport performance is for burning fat. The fat oxidation produces more energy in the form of ATP, which is true, but it comes at a cost. There's more oxygen consumption with that. So when we looked at both endurance and short duration studies, there was an increase across all studies in fat oxidation and ATP production, but there was no performance enhancement. And that it comes at a cost from, again, that oxygen. There was no increased time to exhaustion, which means it didn't take them any more time to, or they didn't get tired later. And it also, there was no increase in the total oxygen used by the body or VO2 max. And also race times were significantly impaired. In fact, one study found that the oxygen consumption, they believe, played a cofactor into the worsened endurance performance. So we'll go ahead and go on to talk about some other sports.
So strength and resistance training. Strength training is a type of exercise that builds muscle mass and strength by lifting a variety of weights. While the resistance training also does the same thing. It's a type of strength training, but you use resistance bands or your body weight to increase muscle mass and strength. So strength in multiple studies on adult male and female athletes comparing a ketogenic diet with a non-ketogenic diet with increased carbohydrate showed that there was no difference in strength performance. And the group on the ketogenic diet also, so for muscle and fat mass, the group on the ketogenic diet also had decreased muscle mass and decreased fat mass compared to the non-ketogenic diet that was consuming higher carbohydrates, despite training as usual, consuming increased or similar amounts of protein as a group that was on the non-ketogenic diet. So the groups that consumed higher amounts of carbohydrate had increased muscle mass compared to the group on the ketogenic diet in these studies as well. And indications for use.
So there are some indications for use of a ketogenic diet, and those are epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease, and cancer. For epilepsy, it's estimated that 30% of people with epilepsy will develop refractory epilepsy, which means that medications no longer work to control their seizures. So we go back to the original design that the ketogenic diet was designed to treat epilepsy, and that's used as a last resort method for those folks. There's been some limited studies on Alzheimer's and ketogenic diets, and also medium chain triglycerides supplementation. And the theory is in Alzheimer's disease that there's an impaired uptake of glucose metabolism in the brain. And so the ketones are not impaired, ketone digestion is not impaired, and or metabolism is not impaired. So using a ketogenic diet has been shown to improve cognition and memory in those individuals. And lastly, tumor cell growth from cancer. Tumor cells are known to take up high rates of glucose to grow. And the theory is to use a ketogenic diet to starve those cancers, the tumor cells, of the glucose uptake. And there has been some limited evidence that that does work, and it does actually shrink tumor cells, but this is not something to use straight across the board. There are some findings, some studies that show that it actually increased tumor cell growth. We talked about who should not be on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, so who should not be on a ketogenic diet? Pregnant women. Pregnant women or women who are planning to become pregnant. Pregnant women due to the obvious risks associated with the unborn baby. And for women who are planning to become pregnant, studies in women on low carbohydrate diet at least 1 year before conception had a 30% higher risk of having an infant with neural tube defect or spina bifida. And for unplanned pregnancies, 89% had a higher risk of having an infant with spina bifida, despite the use of folic acid supplements. For lactating women, this is a group that is not generally studied in these types of diets, so they're typically excluded, but there may be risks associated with nutrient deficiencies in the mother and the infant. For diabetes, there's kind of like mixed studies on this, so I would say that err on the side of caution. We have type 1 and type 2 diabetes, so it's actually unsafe for individuals with type 1 diabetes and may be unsafe for some individuals with type 2 diabetes because of the risk of hypoglycemia, which means low blood sugar. That can lead to potentially dangerous complications. So although there have been some studies on individuals with type 2 diabetes, not on insulin, and less than 3 medications, indicating a decrease in glucose levels compared to a moderate carbohydrate diet. Individuals with type 2 diabetes considering a ketogenic diet should speak with their physician and be closely medically supervised for blood glucose changes, as they may have to have their medications changed. So people with kidney disease, because of the risk of this population can't consume a lot of protein, they should not be on this diet at all. And then lastly, anyone with any health problems should consult their physician if they want to get on this or any other restrictive diet for guidance, and then also their dietitian. And the next. So other recommended patterns.
So we're going to talk about some of the recommended evidence-based eating patterns. And first I'm going to talk about the DASH eating pattern. This stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And this is actually a recommended eating pattern by the US Dietary Guidelines for 2020 to 2025. And if you'll look at the sample, the amounts of servings per 2,000 calorie diet, healthy 2,000 calorie diets, there's 7 to 8 servings of grains, 3 to 5 of fruits, and 4 to 5 of fruits or vegetables. And this is actually quite opposite from the ketogenic diet, as you can see. Now, this diet has also been recommended or proven to lower blood pressure and reduce LDL cholesterol, which is the low density lipoprotein, which is responsible for clogging arteries and causing atherosclerosis. If you look on the right, you'll see the National Institutes of Health infographic on what the benefits are to eating that, or what foods you should eat versus what you shouldn't eat. And again, it's consuming those vegetables and fruits and lean meats only 1 to 2 times per day at max, and really limiting those fatty meats, full fat dairy, sweets, and in this diet particularly, low sodium intake. That's what is proven to lower the blood pressure in this diet. So now we'll go to another.
So the next one we're going to talk about is the Mediterranean diet. And the Mediterranean diet is just an eating pattern of how they eat in the Mediterranean region, just naturally. It consists of fruits, veggies, mostly, and then it does have olive oil in it. And then on the top, you'll notice that it's when it contains the meat, and fish being a huge part of it. If you actually look at the 2 bottom ones, they're all carbohydrates. Fruits, veggie, bread, pasta, all of that is going to be carbohydrate, and that's what you are supposed to be eating daily and consuming it. And then towards the middle, it's going to be that olive oil, where the DASH diet just focuses on just overall vegetable oil. The Mediterranean diet actually just focuses on olive oil. Towards the three top ones are going to be our protein intake. The Mediterranean diet is different from the ketogenic diet and the DASH diet in the sense where it focuses on seafood and fish just because of the omega-3s. And then the top one's gonna be our meat and then our dairy and sweets. So it is the complete opposite of the ketogenic diet where it focuses on more carbohydrates and less of the red meats. Now, we talked about both the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet. The Guidelines of Americans actually recommends to do a combination of a hybrid of both. They have very similar, I don't want to say rules, but guidelines to follow, where it's mostly fruits and veggies, and then following a low consumption of the high saturated meats, like the red meats that we set at the very top of the pyramid. The differences are going to be the Mediterranean diet focuses more on olive oil instead of vegetable oil, and then it has a focus is also more on the fish intake, versus the DASH diet is going to focus more on low sodium intake, which is low salt and more fresh foods. So the overall takeaway of our presentation is that it's not sustainable. You are going to get symptoms about the third or fifth day, and many people actually stop doing it after they start getting the keto flu. There is the risk of vitamin deficiencies in long term, so we don't recommend it in that sense, as well as multiple studies show that after a while, individuals start slowly having more and more carbohydrates until they're no longer on a non-restrictive carbohydrate diet. There's also many risks associated with it. The risks of vitamin deficiencies for certain individuals, for diabetes people. So if you're planning to start any diet that's this restrictive, we do recommend that you speak with your physician or your registered dietitian. Long-term for weight loss, there is no difference between this one and a low calorie, thank you, low calorie diet. So if you're going to choose one, we would recommend more the low calorie, as there's less risks with that. And then with anything else like sports performance, cancer, Alzheimer's, there's a lot more research that still needs to be done. So there's still going to be throughout the years more evolution on that end, and that's going to be recommended for those individuals. We thank you for coming to our presentation. We really enjoyed researching all of this, and we hope you come for the next panels that we're going to be having. We do have a closed survey that you can access it to our QR code, and there's also a link if you're struggling with either of those. We have a paper copy up here at the front that you can take, and then we'll be opening it up for questions. Also, we have a couple references. They're super tiny, but if anybody wants to get a copy of them or get them, we'd be happy to share that too.
We'll give you guys a minute to do the survey, and then we'll allow time for questions.
You guys might scoot just a little.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Would probably be helpful.
Brian in the chat said, great job, thank you, students.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
And then anyone joining on Zoom, if you want to put your questions in the chat or turn on your mic and ask out loud, you could do that at this time.
Yeah, if you guys are all finished, we're ready for questions. So if you guys have any questions.
You can, yeah, go ahead.
I know you mentioned like fiber being a big concern for people on the ketogenic diet, but hypothetically, would it be possible for someone to get enough fiber?
So it is possible to get enough fiber if you're on the 50-gram one. That's not a problem. The problem is that individuals usually don't make the right choices when they're on the ketogenic diet. They'll actually lean more towards the pastas, the fast food, and those carbohydrates rather than leaning towards the vegetables that they can eat. And it's actually very restricted, like we showed. You can't get all fruits and veggies and all grains. So it is possible if you plan it very well, but that's like somebody that's very determined has to be doing that, and somebody with an education or also that's well educated would have to be doing that.
I know you guys kept mentioning like the effects of and the fuel that the brain uses, so would you say the ketogenic diet affects memory or cognition or anything like that?
Well, so in the studies with Alzheimer's patients, it did improve some cognition and memory, but across the board in like your average person on a ketogenic diet, there's no significant change. And that's basically just because in the Alzheimer's patients, that glucose metabolism in the brain is impaired.
Yeah. I would just like to add that, like, if you're a healthy individual, your body's gonna automatically provide that from gluconeogenesis, so converting amino acids to glucose to provide that extra 30% that's not provided by the ketones.
And amino acids are going to be proteins, that's going to be your muscles, when it's going to start decreasing your muscles to use that as protein. I mean, as the energy.
Or from your diet, just depends. Or both.
Maybe.
Or who was first?
Yeah.
Shelby.
Kind of actually going off your last point, I had a friend that followed the keto diet very strictly for years, and he did it for sports performance and muscle gain. It sounds like from what you guys are saying, that's not really a major benefit of that diet. Are there any other negative impacts on sports performance besides that?
Well, there is actually some muscle mass loss because of that breakdown of the muscle, but there's also for sports performance, you're talking those vitamin restrictions and also that increased oxygen consumption, so it's stressing your heart more to have to utilize that oxygen more.
It does though decrease the fat, so if somebody's doing it for like a visual, like they want to show more muscles, you know, and less fat on their body, then there is that fat loss, but their muscle growth in the research studies that we read didn't show that there was a muscle increase.
No, it decreases it. So that if they're trying to increase muscle, that's not the right diet for them. Because again, the higher carbohydrate group in these studies actually gain more muscle.
Since the diet's so high in fat, how does that affect the liver and metabolizing it, and would it cause fatty liver disease?
So one study that I looked at compared a low fat, low calorie diet with a ketogenic diet, found that it actually did not affect the liver in that study. But again, that study was only, I think, 12 weeks. And so we don't know the effects longer term, but it didn't affect the liver negatively at all. And actually, there was some the group that was being studied actually had fatty liver disease, and it actually decreased the fatty liver. So it actually made them have non-fatty liver at one point. Not for everybody, but for some of the people, some of the participants.
And then again, like the same thing, these are really short duration studies, so that longevity piece is not there.
Yeah, so I would caution the use of that because it was one study and it was short term and it was monitored by professionals. Right.
So from your guys' research, about how much weight would you say is lost, like from glycogen stores in water, kind of initially, like that first? I don't know if you found like a percentage or a typical amount that's.
I did not. So it actually varies per individual. If there's like no set amount that you would lose from your glycogen stores, it just depends on the person. Good question. Go ahead, Annie.
Were there any, did any of the studies talk about the differences between simple and complex carbs, like is consuming one better than the other?
So none of the articles specifically talked about it. But just overall nutrition, it is good to be consuming both simple and complex, because complex ones are gonna be those ones that we can't digest versus the simple ones are gonna be more providing more energy, like maltose, glucose.
So I'm just wondering if somebody is on the ketogenic diet, but they're taking a multivitamin, is that like, would that help them out to gain what they're not getting if they're on a keto diet?
The researchers in most studies, most research studies, all participants were on a multivitamin to help that. And it was found that a lot of them didn't, most of them didn't have vitamin deficiencies where they were on it. But there is a research study that we did find with pregnant women that even though they were on a folic acid supplement, that they still had that higher risk of what's it called
neurosteatosis defects.
Yeah,
And actually,
I was
what's
like,
interesting is that stretched out to like over a year.
Yeah,
So even if they've been on the ketogenic diet up to a year prior to getting pregnant, that effect was still, it was still decreased.
it's important to note that like 1 out of 4 pregnancies is unplanned. So even if you're not planning to become pregnant, that is still a risk.
You did mention that when you are in a state of ketosis, you get these flu symptoms. Can medication help with that?
No, because so the medication is going to be to help the immune system versus it's the keto flu isn't an illness of the immune system. It's going to be happening while your body is going through ketosis. As long as you stay on that, those symptoms will persist. Yeah.
So with keto being a trend, especially, I don't know, in the grocery store, I see like tags on certain foods that say keto friendly, and a lot of them highlight the net carbs. So I was just wondering if you guys could kind of help define exactly what net carbs mean, and if someone on the ketogenic diet would actually benefits from the net carbs.
Yeah, I've actually seen that a lot at the grocery stores too. So the net carb is actually the total carb minus the fiber and minus any sugar alcohols. Sugar alcohols are just like an artificial sweetener. And that's what they're calling the net carb, but it's actually a statement that's not really approved by the FDA. And so the only thing that's approved by the FDA are the total carbohydrates and then the fiber that's listed on the nutrition facts. So you should not pay attention to that. It's something that is sort of like made up and not, it's not evidence-based.
Just marketing.
Yeah, marketing, yeah. Yeah, just should try to get you to buy that product. So look at total carbs if you're worried about carbohydrates. Tristan?
So you hear a lot about gut health these days and like your microbiome and bacteria and stuff like that. Would being on a ketogenic diet be bad for you or good for you? Is it beneficial?
So the research that that we looked at with the microgut, it's up in the air a lot because it does affect some microbiotas in a good way, so it'll increase the good ones, and then there's some where it actually also increases bad ones. So it's up in the air depending on what is what, and then some research will be redone and then it doesn't show the same things. It just kind of depends. But what did come across on all the research studies was that the microbiota diversity does decrease, and that we do know is correlated with decreased health outcomes. So whether each individual microbiome, bacteria, whether each microbacteria is affected, that's up in the air still, but we do know that diversity decreases.
And we also know that fiber is important for gut health. When you're eating those non-digestible fibers, your bacteria are breaking those down and they're making those they make short chain fatty acids, which are like food for the cells that line our intestines. And so when you're taking out a big chunk of that fiber, you're not feeding that bacteria. So that's kind of the reason behind you see the overall diversity decrease.
And a lot of those research studies were mostly done on patients with epilepsy. So there isn't a variety of how it will affect the general public's microbiota. It's mostly the ones for epilepsy, and their microbiota is actually different than the general public's. which is correlated to some early epilepsy sometimes.
Have any of you ever been on a ketogenic diet?
I have not.
I have, yes. Well, my family suffers from diabetes. And so it was something that I was looking at as a potential diet, you know? And so I wanted to try it out just to see what the fuss was about. But that was before I knew everything that I know now.
I think as nutrition students, it's also important for us to try these diets out, even if it's for a little bit for a day, just so we actually know what people are going through. Even if it's this diet, the Mediterranean diet, or any diet, any nutrition student should try out the diet, even if it's for a week or a day, just to see what.
Yeah, to see what they're going through, because like even like a low sodium diet, it's like really hard to follow, right? And we're telling our patients to follow those diets. Jessica?
Yes, so too little carbohydrates is something we obviously don't want to do. So then is there such a thing as too many carbohydrates?
So yes, there's just too much carbohydrates that we can intake. If we are intaking too much, then we're not having a balanced diet. We do want to have enough protein and fat in our body, because we do want the protein to keep regenerating for the rest of our body, and as well as fat, we need it for our fat soluble vitamins and other chemicals that we use up in our body.
And if you intake too much carbohydrate, it'll store as fat, so that's what happens. And if that's what you're going for, then.
I think you had a question?
Yeah, at what point of starting the keto diet do you get the keto flu? Is it like the day after or 2 days after?
So it goes from, the average is 3 days, 3 to 5 days, but in some research studies, it was actually up to 10 days. So it really depends on the individual and how strictly you're following the diet.
Yeah, and sometimes once they're adapted and they're in that state of ketosis, those symptoms kind of subside, but they can be at any point or any time.
How long does the keto flu last?
As I was just saying, so for some people, it's constant. For others, once they become keto adapted and they're in ketosis, they over time it can kind of subside, but it just depends on the individual.
If it does subside, if you stop going through keto, can you have like a re-keto flu?
I think you can always be at risk for constipation and all
Yeah,
those, so you can always have that risk for having those symptoms come back.
Like if you start over,
No, so like when you do keto, you're pretty much switching your body how to burn a different energy form.
Right.
So if you stop doing keto, you have to retrain your body how to burn that original energy form. So are there weird side effects with that?
So the side
Yeah.
effects aren't necessarily because like you're restarting it, it's actually the chemical reactions that are happening in our body. So I mean, constipation is just gonna be lack of fiber. So if people are taking fiber supplements or drinking a lot of water, that can help, but it's not guaranteed, right? And then there's also like some of them are gonna be like headaches, nausea, vomiting. Those are all chemical reactions happening within our body, kind of causing those. So it's not like just changing, but it's also the chemicals that are happening when you're in ketosis.
I think what you're saying, like once you stop it. So yeah, once you
like once
stop
you go
it,
back to a regular
you
diet.
go back to a regular diet.
Well, no, but I did read some studies that some people had a really fast regain after introducing carbohydrates into their diet after being on the keto diet.
It kind of goes into hyper overdrive.
But no like symptoms, but that's probably the only thing that could happen.
Have there been any studies that have looked at the effects of a ketogenic diet or people following a keto diet with disordered eating or eating disorders?
Oh, I don't see anything.
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't find anything in my literature review, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I don't think they even searched.
But that would be interesting to look up.
I'm gonna write that down.
I mean, I think we've heard so many research studies. I feel like there was one that mentioned it briefly, but I can't remember what it said. But I think there was one that mentioned it very briefly.
No, I'd be happy to look into it and get back to you on that.
Yeah.